How to stack up an extra $1,000,000. I'm going to talk about the mega wealthy and how they understand how money works. And most people never do understand this, and they miss out on a fortune. That sounds like a good title to a book. It was the title to my first book, Missed Fortune, because of the fortunes people miss out on because they simply don't know what they don't know. Get ready. I am going to blow you away on how you can become your own banker and make an extra $1,000,000, $2,000,000, $10 million. Let's talk about how money works and how you can take advantage of the system of safe, positive leverage. Now, leverage is the ability to own and control assets with very little or none of your money tied up at risk in that asset. And so let's go through and talk about this in a way that you can understand a little bit higher meaning or concept or application of becoming your own banker. Are you ready? Because math will not lie here. So when I talk about how money really works, I will often refer to something called the velocity of money, and a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. So let me sort of simplify a few terms before we proceed and make sure you understand where I'm coming from. When we talk about leverage, for example, that means that you are owning and controlling assets, but with very little or maybe none of your money tied up at risk in that asset. That means if I had $500,000 and I could go pay cash for a $500,000 rental home, okay? Now I own it outright, okay? And so that's not leveraged at all. That's all my money. Well, that's okay, but my money's tied up in that. Now, somebody who leverages without liquidity, they take that $500,000 and they buy 5 rental homes for $500,000 each, and they only put $100,000, 20% in a down payment on all of those. But now that down payment is tied up in the property. It's not liquid. And now they have $400,000 mortgages on 5 properties. They have $2 million of debt. If they get into trouble and there's vacancies, now they don't have any liquidity. They get into trouble. And this is where a lot of people lose their properties in foreclosure. And they curse leverage. No, leverage isn't bad. As I'm going to prove to you here, it's what makes the world go round. Leverage without liquidity is stupidity. So let's talk about how money works and what you can do with money. And there are 4 things basically that you can do with money. You can spend it, and people don't have any problem figuring that out. They lend it, they own with it, or they give it away. Now, most people, they look at that list of 4 bullet points and they go, well, this is the best. Yes, but when they ask me, what do I do? Well, I own and loan on the same assets. I double dip. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you have money in a bank, a credit union, or a multi-trillion-dollar insurance company, it's in a lended position, okay? Are they just a benevolent institution paying you interest? Okay. Do they take your money and put it in a vault and magically have the money to pay you? No. What are they doing with your money? Well, they're turning around and loaning it back out again at a higher rate, or they're investing at a higher rate. If you remember in 2008, when we came so close to a total financial collapse in America, the federal government asked the 5 major banks to disclose where they had their tier 1 assets. That's money they have to have on hand, liquid and safe in case of a run on their bank, okay? Guess where they had 30 to 40% of their tier 1 assets? In insurance companies. And they were usually increasing the safety of that money by as much as 5 or 6 notches. A lot of banks are rated BBB, and a lot of these companies they put their money in are rated AAA. That's 6 notches higher in safety, but also they were increasing their rate of return by 500%. They were paying 1% interest in 2008, okay? So on every $1,000,000, they paid $10,000, and they turn around and put it in insurance companies, increasing the safety and making $50,000. How much more is 50,000 than 10,000? Don't say 40,000. It's 500% more. Okay. And I've often asked people, would you hire an employee for $10,000 that made you an extra $50,000? That's called a 500% return on employment cost, or equipment cost if you bought a widget machine for $10,000 that made you an extra $50,000. Now, I'm not going to get into the velocity of money right now, but let me just make sure I cover that term. If I go to a bank and borrow $1 million construction loan to build a house, So I take the $1 million over the time the general contractor is building my house, and I pay him or her. What do they do with that money? Well, the general contractor pays the suppliers and the subcontractors and takes their profit. But all of those parties do what? They loan that $1 million back to the banks again. This is the velocity of money. The bank loans me $1 million. I pay it to the general contractor and the sub, and then they loan it back, the same $1 million, back to the banks at 1 or 2 or 3%. The banks loan it back out again at 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7%. They do that 17 times a year, okay, in a good economy. In a recession, maybe only 12 times a year. But you cannot calculate the rate of return that banks make. Borrowing money at 3% and turning around and loan it back at 7%, that's not 3% return. That's almost 100% more than the cost of the funds, but it's not their money. So it's called an infinite rate of return. But when you understand the velocity of money, it's incredible. Now, how can you benefit from understanding how money works and becoming your own banker? You ready? Understand that banks and credit unions, their greatest asset is their liabilities, okay? So they borrow your money and pay you, let's say, 4.5% interest on a CD. They are then going to loan that $1 million, let's say you did $1 million, back out again at 7.5%, and they make 3% gross. After overhead and cost, they may only net 1%, but they make millions, billions, and trillions of dollars doing this. It's called a spread or an arbitrage. So they would wither up and die if they stopped paying interest. Their liabilities are their greatest assets. Does that make sense? Now, you need to understand that concept. And if you were like a bank, for a long time, banks in 2008, for example, they were paying less than 1%, but let's say 1%. On every $1 million of OPM, other people's money they borrow, they only have to shell out 10 grand a year. And they disclosed in 2008, they were putting 30 to 40% of their tier 1 assets into insurance companies. And the general account portfolio average of those insurance companies in 2008 was 5. How much more is 5 than 1? Don't say 4, it's 500%. So the banks were making 500% then. Well, I'm going to show you how I was making 500% because interest rates are relative. Before doing that, basically, over the 5 decades that I've been a financial strategist, on real estate, for example, I have borrowed, let's say every $1 million I borrow, if I borrow at 6%, that's probably been the average. Sometimes I've paid as high as 18% back in the 1980s, sometimes as low as 3% like 2008, 2009. But the average is 6. Now, if that's tax deductible, which it is if I do it right on my own residence, but if it's on my rental properties, I can deduct the interest. If I borrow money at 6% in a 33% bracket, I get to write off 60 grand off of my tax returns. I save paying tax on 60. In a 33% bracket, that's 20 grand. This is real money, okay? And so the net cost of a 6% mortgage is 40. That's what it really cost me, is 4%. Now, in my laser funds, I earn 8 to 10%. Let's just say 8. How much more is 8 than 4? This is a no-brainer. I will make 100% returns all day long. Borrowing money at 6% tax deductible, a net cost of 4, and making 8. But most Americans say, you're borrowing at 6 and you're only making 8. You'll do all that for 2% because they don't understand how money works. Back in 2008, when banks were making 500%, I actually borrowed money at 3% tax deductible for my business. In a 33% bracket, that's a net cost of 2. On $1 million, I paid 20 grand in interest. It was incredible. It was nice. And I was making, by rebalancing and diversifying on my laser funds, my Index Universal Life, 10.07. How much more is 10 than 2? 500%. The banks were making 500%. I was making 500%. We're both happy. Did you miss out? Do not miss out, okay? Pay attention to how to become your own banker. So what you need to understand is that there's some key elements of a prudent investment. The reason why I keep my cash separated from the real estate, let's say, is to maintain liquidity, safety, and earn a predictable rate of return. Because I learned in 1982, after losing my own home in foreclosure, that it didn't matter how much equity was on a sheet of paper on a balance sheet in my house. It meant absolutely nothing if I could not access it. And when you need it the worst, it's the hardest to get. And when all of a sudden you have more supply than demand, the value of my house dropped down in half. I learned that lesson, okay? And I didn't pay extra, down payment or principal payments. It's just my house appraised for double what I built it for when I first moved in. So I thought I had the world by the tail. No, it appraised for $305,000 in 1978, and I built it for $150,000. But that $150,000 of equity didn't mean anything to me when I needed it a couple of years later, when a fellow in our company above us embezzled funds, and while they were investigating him, they froze our income for 9 months, and 3 of us lost our homes because we lacked liquidity, okay? We didn't have the money to keep making the mortgage payments, okay? We didn't have safety of principal. The house went down in value. So in other words, I did not have liquid access to the money in the home. If you go to borrow it, the bank's only going to loan you money based upon your ability to repay. If you lack the ability to repay, which I did, they're going to say fat chance. Fortunately, I had a timeshare at a ski resort that I sold, and I brought the delinquent mortgage current, and then I had a duplex that I owned that I sold, but I didn't have any other assets after that. So I finally put my house on the market. I had a bona fide appraisal for $305,000. I listed it for $295,000. No takers. I lowered it down to $285,000, $275,000, $265,000, $225,000, $195,000. Now, I'll never forget the day that my wife and I walked into the county courthouse, and on the courthouse steps at the sheriff's auction, we watched that beautiful home get foreclosed on. Now, if you read the full story, we went out the very day and bought another home with no money down and no credit, because I've never had to satisfy a down payment with my own money. It's just that I let too much equity accumulate in that house instead of keeping it separated, okay? So I learned how to maintain liquidity, safety, so that when my house goes down in value, and it's done that many times since 1982, to not lose, and then to earn a rate of return. Now, I want to earn a rate of return at least equal to the net cost of the funds, but most of the time, I've been able to earn a rate of return of 200 up to 500% more than the net cost of the funds. This creates mega wealth. This is what savvy, smart people do to become their own banker. So let me give you some examples. I call this, your family bank or my family bank. If I kept $100,000 of money separated in a properly structured IUL laser fund that passes liquidity, safety, rate of return test with flying colors, and it's tax-free, it's compounding tax-free, and instead of paying an extra down payment or a bigger down payment or extra principal payments or whatever, I keep that $100,000 here instead of plowing it against the mortgage. I'm going to borrow the money at 9%, and I'm only going to earn 7.5%. Now, most Americans go, "You're not going to get anywhere." I go, "Really?" Well, if I borrow at 9% interest, tax deductible, in a 33% bracket, it doesn't cost me 9, it costs me 6. So I'm paying a net of 6%, and I'm earning 7.5. That's only a 1.5 point spread. You'll do all that for 1.5 points? Yes, because over a 30-year period, if it's only done one time, it's an extra $775,000. Math does not lie, okay? You're kissing that goodbye if you take that asset and combine it with the other, and you have no leverage and no liquidity because you've got it all tied up in the property, okay? You actually cut your assets in half. When you keep them separated, you double them. So then people say, well, what if you borrowed at 7.5% interest and only earned 6? Well, borrowing at 7.5 tax deductible is a net cost of what? 5, and I'm only earning 6. That's only a 1 point spread. Is that worth it? Well, I will make up the financing cost in about 6 months, but yeah, I'll make $761,000 by doing that. That's 1% spread. Well, in actuality, for every 100,000 of equity I keep separated, if I borrowed at 6.5%, which is a little bit higher than my average, and I only earned 8.5%, which is, about 1.5% less than what I normally earn, around 10, I like to be conservative. And people go, "You'll do all that for 2%. Yep. Why? That's an extra $1,055,000. If that's all I achieve being my own banker is an extra $1 million, it's worth it. But not only does it make me an extra $1 million, I have access to this money anytime I need it. If it's in the property, there's only one way to get it out. That's to borrow it out, and when I need it the worst, it's the hardest to qualify, or sell it. And maybe you don't want to do that. So I want to maintain liquidity, safety, and rates of return in order to accumulate an extra million. That's just icing on the cake. Does that make sense? So if you want to learn how to do this, I would recommend you study my book, The Laser Fund. This is my most recent bestseller, and it's flying off of our warehouse shelves. It retails on Amazon for $20 plus shipping. I'll tell you what, if you go to laserfund.com or click on the link below, and you contribute a nominal amount towards the shipping and handling, I'll cover the rest of that cost, but I'll pay for the book. And I'll fire out a hard copy to you via priority mail. This is actually 2 books in one. This side is for the left brain learner with all the charts, graphs, and explanations, about 200 pages. If you're more of a right brain learner, you flip it over to this side. And there's 62 actual client stories of how the Laser Fund can be used for real estate management, working capital for your business. It knocks the socks off of IRAs and 401ks, an emergency fund, maximizing your pension if you're a school teacher, whatever. It's like a financial Swiss Army knife, the dream solution for all kinds of financial goals. But you'll read the stories in here. Now, while you're in there claiming your free copy, if you like to listen and learn or watch and learn, there's audio and video formats. You can even register for a free webinar that we teach on a regular basis. These are very educational. But you can even schedule an appointment with a certified IUL professional that can show you how these strategies can apply in your particular set of circumstances with your numbers. And they'll do that at no cost or obligation. If you say thanks but no thanks, you're not going to get an invoice. Is that fair enough? But this is the beginning of your brighter future, and begin now by claiming your free copy of The Laser Fund.